This is Camp Countdown, a Toronto Maple Leafs podcast series. I'm your host, Kyle Cushman, and on today's show, we're diving into Maple Leafs prospect Nikita Grebenkin. Now, there's going to be some talk about how to actually say his name because Nikita is coming over to North America for the first time this upcoming fall. He's going from the KHL to probably the Marlies with the AHL after signing his first NHL contract earlier this year. And as is the case for quite a few, specifically Russian players, they're coming over to the NHL and changing how their name is spelled or how it's pronounced. For Nikita's case, it's the same thing as what we saw in the past with Igor Shesterkin, where in the past it was Shesterkin, Y-O-R in the middle of his name, and he changed it to E-R in the middle of his name. For Nikita, in the past we've said Nikita Grebenkin with a Y-O in the middle of his name, and that's probably going to be changed to an E. At least that's what he's requested coming over to North America. We've seen it in the past with people like Igor Korshkov, who changed his name from Y-E to E and things like that. So for Nikita Grebenkin coming into this season, it's pronounced like that in Russia, but we'll probably be saying Nikita Grebenkin before long. But for today's show, we're still going with the Russian pronunciation because that's what we've known in the past couple of years since he's been in the Maple Leafs organization. So how did he get to the Leafs organization? He was drafted in 2022 as an overage prospect in the 5th round. He was taken out of the Russian Junior League after a pretty good season, but primarily as a playmaker. Now, in the past, I've been burned by Russian prospects who put up big point totals in the Russian Junior League and never did anything else in their career. A couple of names that come to mind, Bulat Shafagulin, if you really remember a few years back, was one of those guys that put up big totals. The Kings drafted him. He never did anything. I can't remember his first name. I think it might have been Artem Manukian, I think his name is. An Armenian guy, I think, drafted by the Vancouver Canucks. Put up insane numbers at the junior level as like a super small guy. Never did anything. Igor Shvirov, I think his name is another one, Colorado draft pick, never did anything. You can even look at the Leafs and a recent guy, Dmitry Ovchinnikov, who speedy, kind of average to smaller size, very slight player, put up great numbers in the junior league and never really broke through with the Marlies besides a couple of big scoring stretches, got traded to Minnesota at the deadline as just kind of a contract being moved and wasn't even tendered a qualifying offer by the Wild as he heads back to the KHL. So even just there are a few players off the top of my mind, junior league prospects out of Russia who never really panned out or did anything. So how is Nikita Grebenkin trying to buck that trend? Well, I was nervous when he was drafted just because players with his profile are very much hit or miss. Drafted as an overage prospect playing in the Russian Junior League. If you're an 18, 19-year-old playing in the Russian Junior League, your peers, if they're on track to play in the NHL, are probably playing professional games at that point in their career, either in the KHL or in like the AHL equivalent in the VHL. Grebenkin wasn't doing that when he was drafted. He was still playing in the Junior League. He was one of the best players in the Junior League. Don't make any mistake about that, but he was still playing in the Junior League. So when he was drafted, I had some reservations. I needed to see it before I believed it. And it wasn't that long before we saw it. He started that season in the Metallurg Magnitogorsk system, one of the best systems and one of the best teams in Russia in the KHL. That's great because you're getting the best resources and you're with a good team. The downside, especially for a young player, is it's extremely difficult to break into the lineup at the KHL level and gain the trust of coaches. For Grebenkin, early in that season, post-draft, in what was his draft plus 2 season, but just one season into his tenure with the Maple Leafs, he was bouncing around all over the place. He was being scratched by the KHL team when he was on the roster. He was playing as the 13th forward and not even getting into games despite dressing. He was bouncing up and down between the VHL, KHL, even got an MHL stint where he put up 3 assists in one game. He was clearly too good for that level at that stage at 19 years old. And so the resolution there which isn't always the case for certain KHL players. A lot of players just kind of get stuck in that system and don't really get an opportunity to play. The solution for Grebenkin was moving to a different KHL team on loan from Magnitogorsk. So they retained his rights, but he went to a different KHL team. He went to Amur Khabarovsk, one of the bottom feeders in the KHL, but a team that was trying to contend for a depth spot in the playoffs. Grebenkin goes there and he flourishes. One of the best under 20 players in the KHL that season in 22-23, got legit top 6 minutes, played on the power play, scored 9 goals in that stretch, and ended up winning KHL Rookie of the Year. A big award to win, even though its history doesn't necessarily have some big standout names that have gone to have NHL success. So having that success in the KHL, and I think it's important to keep in mind that he's playing in a bit more of a diluted KHL because of a lot of factors in Russia, between the war and players not wanting to go into Russia and necessarily play there as much, because certain federations in Europe have actually banned players from playing for the national team that have played in the KHL since the war against Ukraine started. Now, that is starting to change. Slovakia recently overturned that rule with the Olympic qualifiers coming up. So that might get back to like the more typical KHL we've seen in past years. But it's important to note that the strength of the KHL has dipped the past couple of years, with less kind of import players, or the top import players, going to that league. But still, very impressive numbers from Grebenkin as a KHL rookie to win that award, and doing that at that kind of professional stage that quickly after being drafted puts you on the radar of people in North America, and for Leafs fans looking for prospects to pay attention to, especially as the team really needs kind of depth prospects to hit at the NHL level. We haven't really seen that many middle to late round prospects for the Leafs break through in recent years. We've seen guys like Matt Nyes and Nick Robertson kind of come through as second round picks. Haven't quite seen the later picked players break through. Grebenkin could be one of those guys. So he goes into last season back with Metallurg Magnitogorsk, going from one of the bottom feeders in the KHL to one of the top teams. And what does he do? He has a phenomenal season. Grebenkin scores 19 goals and 41 points in 67 games in the KHL with Magnitogorsk. That's second on the team in scoring, only behind Minnesota Wild first-round pick Danila Yurov. Compare that to all KHLers under the age of 21. Grebenkin ranked third, only behind his teammate Yurov and Matvei Michkov, a top 10 pick and a top prospect across all of hockey, but especially for the Philadelphia Flyers. So that's the kind of level that we're talking about for Grebenkin here. Even though he's not that first round pick, he's putting up numbers comparable to those kind of guys at this stage. And into the KHL playoffs, Magnitogorsk goes, and Grebenkin starts nursing injuries throughout that playoff run. He doesn't play much at the end of it, not because of his performance, but due to those injuries that he's playing through. But at the beginning of the playoffs, he's one of the most important forwards on that Metallurg team. He actually scores the overtime winner to eliminate his former team in Khabarovsk, and Metallurg goes on to win the KHL championship. At the end of the season, Grebenkin, after some debate, ends up signing his entry-level contract with the Maple Leafs. Compare that to Danila Yurov, who signed an extension with Magnitogorsk. So Grebenkin is coming to North America this fall, which is a great news for Maple Leafs fans, because the sooner that you can get those prospects to your AHL team and start adapting to North American lifestyle, North American hockey, the better. For Grebenkin, he's already 21 years old. He was drafted as an overage prospect, 2003 born player, so he's a bit more on an accelerated timeline than some of the other players drafted in 2022, like a Fraser Minton. So for Grebenkin, the next steps are going to be what he can do here in the American Hockey League. He has some sneaky physicality. He's not somebody that backs down. He actually had fights in the KHL. He's not somebody that necessarily starts those, but he will happily engage if you kind of bring the fight to him. He's also sneaky at 6'2" and over 190 pounds. It's something where it's not necessarily the first thing that you look at with Grebenkin is the size element, the physicality element, but he has it and he's willing to use it when necessary. You look more to the playmaking and the really strong playmaking along the boards, winning battles there. creating plays off the boards, bringing them to the middle. Those board to middle plays are so important in today's NHL, and that's one of the areas that Grebenkin succeeds. We've seen his shot improve in recent years. He still has this kind of awkward upright skating stance, but he still can kind of move pretty well and attack on the rush. So there's a lot to like about Grebenkin's game, and the question is what he can do in the AHL this upcoming season and what he can kind of do eventually in the NHL. He projects as a top 9 scorer. He's somebody that brings some physicality, like I said, but brings that playmaking ability. He can play on a second power play unit, potentially even penalty kill as well. He's somebody to definitely be excited about and is probably a top 5, top 6 prospect in the Leafs organization. He fits the size profile for somebody that can play in the NHL. He has the scoring prowess the last couple of seasons in a major professional league. So he has the track record of succeeding. It's just kind of how he can do with that transition to the American Hockey League, which we've seen some players struggle with and some players succeed with. So I'm very excited to see what Grebenkin can do in his first season in the AHL upcoming this year with the Marlies. There's been some talk about him potentially pushing for an NHL gig this year. I think that's pretty premature, at least to start the season. We'll see how the year develops and how he progresses. I would be a little bit surprised if he makes his NHL debut this year, just because of how many other forwards are in the mix to kind of get into some games in a pinch and guys that are more experienced than him. But if Grebenkin is playing well enough with the Marlies and is one of those top guys with the Marlies, absolutely, I can see him getting an NHL debut as soon as this season in a pinch. Ultimately, I think we're looking at 1 to 2 year timeline for Grebenkin to legitimately push for NHL minutes as a regular as soon as potentially next fall, depending on how his rookie season goes. But in my opinion, more likely at least a season and a half with the Marlies to really establish himself before he pushes for a legitimate NHL roster spot. And again, a lot of that comes down to opportunity, injuries, and kind of how the Leafs roster develops over these next couple of years. But certainly, he's a player to be excited about at this stage. And I think he's going to make a lot of fans if he plays in the preseason early on that stage, depending on how he's progressing from his injuries at the end of the KHL season. He was in Toronto for development camp this year. He didn't hit the ice at all, but he was around the team and he was getting some of the off-ice stuff and getting to meet the guys around the team. And actually with that, a bit of a funny anecdote with Grebenkin. So if you know anything about him, he has a signature smile, I guess you could say. He looks like a hockey player, missing a couple of chiclets. And so when he smiles, you know it's him. Around development camp time, I can't remember if it was in the middle of development. Yeah, it was right in the middle of development camp. It was like the Saturday of development camp and the next day was the main scrimmage. It was Money in the Bank for WWE here in Toronto. I got last minute tickets thanks to my buddy Spencer who hooked me up. And it was great. It was a great time, a really fun event. But as I was walking there was obviously a ton of people kind of in and around Maple Leaf Square. But there's somebody kind of talking on a phone and FaceTiming somebody and kind of talking, walking down the street and smiling and looking all over the place, kind of showing kind of the crazy scene going around. And I look at the person and I'm like 99% sure that it's Nikita Grebenkin. You do not mistake that smile anywhere else. So that's my little funny Nikita Grebenkin anecdote. A fun personality, bubbling personality that is coming to impress this year in North America, and I think he's going to make a lot of fans very quickly. Let's dive more into Grebenkin's game now, and I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on for this edition than Brian Stewart. You might know him as brigstew86 online on X, Twitter, and for Pension Plan Puppets, one of the best Leafs prospects writers in the game. If you're not following him, you're doing it wrong. His clips, his profiles, his articles are second to none. And there is nobody that is a bigger fan of Grebenkin in the Leaf space than Brian. So I'm very excited to get to my conversation now with Brian Stewart of Pension Plan Puppets to talk all about Nikita Grebenkin. Very excited to welcome on Brian Stewart now to chat all about Nikita Grebenkin, I think is still how we're saying it. I don't know because of the spelling change. We'll have to figure that out come the preseason. But Brian, thanks for taking some time today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Yeah, the Grebenkin thing, I'm a Grebenkin truther, I think. They might spell it that way, and that's fine. But whenever you listen to the Russian broadcast, they always pronounce it Grebenkin. So that's how I'm going to say it. we'll deal about how we spell it otherwise.
Exactly. It brings me back to when Igor Shishkin was like first
Oh
coming on,
yeah.
and it was like Shishkin, and then he came over here and he changed it the same way. Then we changed how to say it. I don't know. We'll
Oh, I
figure it
can't.
out. You gotta love how names change and stuff as soon as they come to the league when we all know how to say it. But I
Yeah.
digress. The name change, whatever. We'll get to that later on, I guess. But first and foremost, dive into the player himself. Grebenkin has been a prospect that has kind of risen onto the scene pretty quickly the past couple of years.
Mhm.
Just give us a quick little intro to his play style and what you see from him.
Yeah, so I've been latching on Grebenkin pretty quick. We can go into details of the how he looked right away later. But what I like about him is that he has just an interesting mix of skills with it, where he's kind of got an interesting blend of sort of skill and power to his game, where he's not necessarily an elite dangler, like he's not like Austin Matthews, you can't like stick handle in a phone booth type thing to say. But something I do find is that while he's also not necessarily like a Marner level skater in terms of like how elusive he can be or quick. He does have kind of a mix of both, just at lower levels. So he might not stick handle a phone booth, but he can kind of like dance in the phone booth. He has very good feet as far as agility and how he can kind of elude defenders, keep them off of him while he's kind of like making move and use little shimmies, fakes, deeks to kind of freeze the defender and then blow by them once he kind of gets them paused for a bit. That's one of the reasons why the strength of his game that's kind of come through anytime I've watched him since he was drafted has been his rush game. He's always good at getting the puck in or like pouncing on a turnover, something like that in the defensive zone or the neutral zone, immediately heading back up the ice on kind of a counter attack and either creating some separation from just taking it himself or then using the feet to open up a passing lane or open up a shooting lane for him. And he doesn't have the best shot, although it is much better now. We can get into that, but he's really good at finishing in close, whether it's off a rebound or making a nice deke on the goalie, kind of opening a 5-hole and using a backhand, things like that. So yeah, that's what I'd say is how I describe his game.
Yeah, and so he's, as I mentioned off the top, kind of come onto the scene pretty quickly over these past couple of years. I think it's best to kind of start from the beginning when he was
Mm-hmm.
drafted by the Leafs and kind of go along his journey in the Leafs organization as well. When he was drafted, he was an overager out of the Russian Junior League. And I don't know about yourself, but I know I've been burned many times by some fun prospects out of the Russian Junior League who
Yep.
pop some exciting numbers and then never really do anything, sometimes even in like the KHL, let alone in
Yeah.
North America. And so when the pick was made, I had a lot of reservations about it until we kind of saw him at higher levels. We kind of saw that pretty early after he was drafted. But what did you make of the pick at the time and kind of what you saw early on in his tenure in the Leafs organization?
So when he was drafted, I didn't really know a lot about him, and
2022. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people. Like I'm not necessarily a general scout who's going to stay on top of like all the big prospects and kind of like know like even if I didn't rank him very high, I knew about Grebenkin from his original draft year. But I read the scouting reports that came out on him. I talked with Will Scouch, who's in the scouting thing, and like he talked about him a bit during the Leafs pick. So I did know that he had some offensive skill to him, kind of good mix of size and skill to his game. But I was looking at then his stats and kind of how they stacked up to other Russians who were his same age, even if he was not drafted until a year after. And so in the MHL, statistically, he was, I think, in the top 5 in his draft year in kind of for scoring for his age group. The problem sort of with that is that the really high-end Russian prospects aren't in the MHL really at that point, or they don't spend that much time in there. They do a mix of like the VHL or the KHL as well, whereas he spent full-time MHL even through his D+1 year where the Leafs actually drafted in 2022. So aside from that, like the highlights, I liked the sound of him because I think at the time he was the first forward that Toronto had drafted who was taller than 6 feet. Or was that the same year Minton was drafted? It might have been. So like it
Yeah,
might have been like the
he was
first
in that
year.
mix of like one of
It
those like
was,
first
yeah.
guys that were in that range. Yeah.
So, and that was kind of like an interesting turning point because that's still under Dubas. Like this is before
Yep.
Treliving came on board. So it was an interesting change that you're starting to see from it, but it still kind of had the similar hallmarks as far as having the guy who had like this the types of skills that they like scouting. Like when you hear from like Wes Clark and all the post draft interviews he's talking about. But yeah, so like I was interested in him, but didn't know a lot about him until I started watching him in his kind of first year after he was drafted.
Yeah, and so he gets into that post-draft season and
Yeah.
starts making some waves pretty early on. Of course, as is kind of the case with a bunch of these Russian prospects, they bounce around a bunch of different leagues early on in the season. But after that kind of initial couple of months where he kind of bounces between being way too good for the MHL, not
Yeah.
really being ready to step into one of the top KHL teams in Magnitogorsk, and ends up on loan to one of the bottom feeders there in Khabarovsk. Can you kind of take us through what you saw
Yeah.
then once he started to break through at the KHL level? And obviously that season he ends up winning KHL Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, he was really exciting once he got to Amor, and like you were right, like he was way too good for the MHL when they sent him
Yeah.
down there. It was disgusting watching him. He was just toying with the opponents as he was playing with it, and even in the VHL, it was a bit mixed, and he didn't play it for very long. I think it was only like 4 games or something,
Yeah.
but you could still see he was one of the best players on his team already, even if it's kind of had some small inconsistency. But once you got to Amor, or that's probably pronounced because that's
Yeah.
how I can
Yeah.
remember the
I
name
don't know.
from
KHL
it.
teams, I
Yeah.
never know whether to refer to like Amor or like the city or what, but
Yeah, but once he got there, he had regular playing time in not necessarily the highest role, but in like he was playing in the top six. He was playing in the top power play unit. He did get some penalty kill time, but not that much. But he was playing like one of the more used forwards they had because they were a very top heavy team. Like they did have some good forwards at the top, but they didn't have depth. It was kind of the big problem. But so he was getting that ice time, that time against kind of KHL level opposition, as opposed to even the VHL where he seemed like almost too good at that point. But that's where he started to kind of show off really the strengths of his game with his rush game, his playmaking on the power play. They mostly used him on kind of the Marner spot on the point, being the kind of primary distributor from it. And sort of towards the end of the year, started transitioning him more to being around the net, which is where Metalurg Magnitogorsk used him this past year as well. I mean, get into more on that, but it would just kind of let him blossom and try things at the KHL level, learn what works, what didn't work, and kind of refine his game a bit more. But it kind of really helped his offensive game blossom within a KHL system. Because when he started in the preseason, it was he showed some flashes, and it was something where, like, again, you talk about getting burned off Russian prospects who did great. So looking at like Ovchinnikov, for
yeah.
example, who even in his draft year like had more points, and so he seemed excited. He was fast, he was skilled. But when I was watching, like, because I'd seen Mitchell come out play in the KHL as well, he wasn't getting that much time. And you wish, like, oh, I wish he'd get more. Like, he deserves it. He's the least prospect. Give him more time. I want to see that type of thing. But as soon as I started watching Grebenkin, even in the preseason of his first year, and he kind of started in the KHL, but wasn't getting much time, I could see the difference. And that was a good turning point for me to kind of pay attention to the things that they can do well at higher levels, or things that translate better at higher levels. And Grebenkin was showing all of it. He could be a beast down low on the cycle and along the boards. He was feisty. He would not, I think he had a fight in one of his first preseason games to stick up for his goalie. But his skills still show through, just in different ways. Like, he wasn't, being a cowboy like the MHL can be, where, like, skill rules all, there's no system, just do what you want type thing. He was doing it within a system and doing it on a cycle and a sustained offensive pressures where you're thinking, I could see that working in the NHL once he gets there and if he gets better.
Yeah, and so that season obviously goes very well for him with Amor, ends up winning KHL Rookie of the Year, and really puts his name on the map among kind of Leafs fans as a prospect to watch in the KHL. Obviously, winning Rookie of the Year in a league like that is
Yeah.
going to get some play. And so he goes from Amor, which was one of like the bottom feeders in the KHL, a fringe playoff team, and he comes back to Magnitogorsk this season, the team that he was on loan from, couldn't make the season prior, and this is one of the top teams in the KHL. What did you see from him in the early going there to make the adjustment to that top team and eventually be one of the top players on that team?
So there are a few things that, and you say this about a lot of prospects, like there's a few things you're looking for them once they are kind of advancing into like a higher level or just a year old in the next season, especially when they're kind of around age. You want to see if they kind of grow anymore, not necessarily height wise, but like, do they add some muscle, do they get stronger? Because that helps a lot of elements of their game. And especially for him, because he has that size and was kind of learning how to use it on the cycle in front of the net. He was easier to push around. And that's why he was still kind of a bit of a perimeter player the previous year, from like relying on his playmaking that way. But immediately in the preseason, like, he looked bigger and stronger. His skating was more explosive. There was one preseason game where He was behind the net. The other team picked up the puck and was starting up ice, and he ran to chase this guy down, clobbered him into the boards to take the puck back, and took it back in the offensive zone. And you're just looking at like the explosive skating and the power to like to knock that guy over. And again, this is KHL level competition. We're not talking about like NHL or JHL or VHL at that point. That it was a lot better. You could see that he had more zip to his shot, which was a big weakness of him the year before. Like I kind of called his shot before like a wet noodle. Like if it was slow to get off, it didn't really have a lot of power to it. He would use it best when it was in close, and he didn't necessarily need it to be that kind of that quick or that powerful to get along that. Plus, he really continued to evolve his kind of in close, in tight, net front, along the board cycle game where it became impossible. There was an assist he had where he put Dmitry Simashev, a top Russian prospect defense, he's a big guy, even if he's younger, and like a noted, like really good defensive prospect. And Grebenkin just put him on his back behind the net and just kind of darted back and forth. Simashev couldn't pin him on the boards, couldn't check him, couldn't get his stick on the puck. And then he fired a perfect pass all of a sudden out in front of the net and for the primary assist. It was a thing of beauty. And that's the type of thing that he got really good at this year. So even if he didn't necessarily have as many assists as he did, he was still a much better playmaker. And Mettler, like the previous year, they had it was a very different roster year. They had a lot of turnover where like Yurov, he was a top NHL prospect, first round for Minnesota. He was getting his first full-time stint with them as well. Roman Kanserov, the Chicago Black pick, he was kind of, I think it was his first year where he was kind of getting any time at all. So they were going younger, and a lot of their top players left for either other KHL teams, the AHL, other European leagues. And they brought in some new guys, but they had these spots for the young kids to kind of give them a shot, and all of them like took it a lot. And Grebenkin took it a lot as well. Like it was great to see how much his game evolved for the last year.
Yeah, and you talk about that evolution. When he was drafted, he had 17 goals in 58 games as in the MHL as an overage prospect, which isn't great. Obviously, the playmaking was the draw at the time. He scores 9 goals as a KHL rookie, and then this year pops up to nearly 20. What did you see kind of the evolution of his shot, or potentially where he was getting those shots from as well?
It was a mix of both. So for his shot, it became a lot better. It got to the point where the last goal he scored was in the playoffs, where he scored the overtime winner against the team he played for the previous year more. And that was just a snipe. Like he got the pass back to him, entered the zone to it, and dived around the top of the faceoff, or maybe bit inside, but he beat the goalie clean. Like that was power, quick release, and accuracy that he didn't necessarily have the previous years. So that and he did it a couple other times in the year, but primarily the ways that he was scoring a lot of his goals was around the net. He got a lot better at, if he was getting the puck off the boards or off the cycle, not always just settling for trying to make a pass, but trying to drive it to the net himself. Like a Matthew Nyes light type thing. And not necessarily his level, but he was starting to do that type of thing. Or if he was used as a net front guy on the power play or even on offensive zone possessions when he didn't have the puck, he was really good at capitalizing on loose pucks, on rebounds, deflections, kind of passes in front, where he became just a weapon in front of the net to know where to place a stick, how to place himself, his positioning, his timing. And then not necessarily just like whacking at the puck necessarily, but you could use some of the skill he has to kind of wait the extra second for the goalie to take himself out of position, or wait the extra second for, a guy's stick to clear out of the way, so that he could just kind of, go around a bit and then tuck it in once he had that space. So his goal scoring did improve a lot, and it was a combination of a shot and just getting better at being where he could score goals.
Yeah, you mentioned the big goal in the KHL playoffs to eliminate his former team.
Yeah.
Obviously, his team goes on to win the KHL championship as well. He was banged up throughout that KHL run, so he wasn't quite getting the same kind of usage and minutes at the end of that run. But just how important is it for a player like Grebenkin coming over to North America now for this upcoming season to finish on such a high note, albeit with the injury?
Oh, I think it was great for him. Like the Metallurg as a whole, like they were, I don't know if I saw recently that he had the interview where he was confirming it was his lower back and a bit of his shoulder, but Kanserov and Yura both had surgery afterwards as well, because I don't remember what their injuries were, but they were beat up as well. And like the first round, he had the most ice time of any of the forwards. When he was healthy, he became a vital forward for them. And I think that is very important because the AHL is a step up in competition compared to the KHL, but not necessarily by much. But for him to kind of get to that level, and more importantly, like even if he wasn't necessarily the best player, quote unquote, at the time, he became the player that his coach relied on a lot in multiple situations. And that's something that we're going to look for in the AHL as well. Like sort of be like I'm not necessarily expecting him to lead the team in scoring and goals and points or any of that. I'm kind of hoping he kind of does what Zach Hyman did in his first AHL season, or his only AHL season really, where he had like a good amount of points. It was like 30 something in 50 games, something like that. But you could hear from the coach and the talking about who's the surprising guy, who's the guy that you think is going to get the chance in the NHL. All of them, or you hear quotes from the coaching and from other scouts saying it's Zach Hyman. Like they could see the little things that he did that coaches loved and just made him indispensable. So, if you need a goal, you can throw him out because even if he's not the guy like an Austin Matthews who's going to snipe a goal for you, he'll help you do things in the offensive zone that will lead to goals when you need it. Or he could be at times a kind of good defensive forward who uses his size, his reach, kind of like quickness and all of that to jump passing lanes, deflect. That's how he created some of his rush goals this year, was deflecting a pass away, lifting a stick, and then creating an odd man rush the other way for all that. So if he's going to be doing all those types of things, I think there's a good chance that we could see him in the NHL in some capacity. I know it might be another question you're going to ask, so I might be jumping the gun a bit.
Hey, it's all good.
Yeah, but I could definitely see it.
Yeah, so why not get to it now? So he's coming over to North America this year, signed his contract. He's been to Toronto a couple of times at kind of the end of the season after his first KHL season, and then this year around the team for development camp, even though he wasn't on the ice due to the injury that he was recovering from. Coming to North America is obviously going to be a big change for him, not only just the lifestyle, but also the play on the ice and potentially playing for the Marlies as well. Kind of what are going to be some of the biggest challenges you see for Grebenkin coming to the North American style?
It's definitely going to be adapting to North American systems. The way they play the game in the KHL and with Russia is, in some teams, it's sort of like, I guess, any league. Some teams kind of play a more NHL style than others. But it's different culture. It's a different, I think we heard it from some like North American players who play in Russia. Like they described as how different it is to communicating with the coaches and kind of the systems they come up with. So there's going to be some adaptation for that with him here. It'll be nice because I'm pretty sure like one of, if not both of Akhtyamov and Peksa will be on the roster. Like he'll have some of those Russians to kind of keep him company for some of that. But adapting to the game and adapting to a different role, because where he was, even if he wasn't like the guy, and more like he was still a top guy. And now he's going to be coming to an environment in the AHL, especially the AHL, where hopefully in the AHL they're preparing him for that, where he's not necessarily going to be that important to the team. It sounds weird to say, but he's not going to be expected to be like a top six primary, offensive support guy. If he gets there, that's great, but it's not going to be what's expected of him. So he's going to have to learn to kind of, again, do the little things, make himself be able to fill multiple roles. So if he could become a consistent penalty killer, that'd be great. If he could become a guy who can be more kind of consistent off the puck in his own end, that'd also be great. Because like his offensive game is not enough necessarily to carry him yet. So being a well-rounded guy would be very important for him. So just work on all that. Improve your shot, improve kind of the techniques you can use, how to use your size, how to take the puck off the boards like Matthew Nyes, and all that type of thing.
Yeah, and so Grebenkin comes over now. He's got some sneaky size at like 6'2", over 190 pounds now. At least that's what he was most recently listed at. We'll kind of see what that comes in at when we kind of get the first North American measurements. But that's what he was listed at. He comes over having two really strong seasons in the KHL where he grew pretty significantly this past year on a much better team as well. What do you consider to be the best attribute for Grebenkin at this point of his development? What is kind of like the standout trait of his game?
Definitely his playmaking, but how he's used that or learned to use that has changed in really good ways. So before, his playmaking was like, again, it was on the perimeter, it was off the rush, which is good. Like rush offense is always very valuable because of how high danger and how quality is. But what he also then learned to do was how to make plays in the offensive zone in close. So he had a disgusting assist on the power play where he did like this. He received the puck with his back to the net and did this like JVRS sort of spinorama, no look blind pass back across the crease, the ice. And like the camp fooled the camera, it fooled the defense, it fooled the goalie, and his teammate just was wide open, an easy tap in for it. And so that's the type of thing that he can do on the power play, or just even when he's in front of net in general. Or some of the plays I mentioned, the one against Simashev that he can kind of do when he's on the cycle, take it to the net, get it out in front of the net, just attack the net. That's the mindset that he started to take on more and more last year. And when he has his level of kind of skill in his skating and just like the vision, the anticipation, all that, it all comes together in the offensive one much better for him now. And that's, if it's his offensive skills going to help him kind of get to the NHL, it's going to be that type of thing.
Yeah, and so over these couple of seasons he's been in the Leafs organization, we've seen his game grow pretty significantly from an overage prospect playing in the Russian Junior League to a top player on literally the KHL champions. Been a lot of development, but of course, there's still a lot of development still to go. What is one of the key areas you see as something that we need to see Grebenkin improve on to eventually become an impact NHLer?
As I touched on this before, but definitely I would say the consistency in the effort and execution of his defensive game. So where he shows he's more than capable of, making good reads, keeping his head in a swivel, looking around in the zone to kind of see where everyone is and help him kind of anticipate, jump into the passing lane, even if he doesn't cleanly pick it off, knocking away, making them reset, or knocking it to a teammate, and things like that. Chasing the guy down to strip the puck or pin him against the boards, doing little things like that. He's capable of it. He does do it at times, but there are also times where he can get a bit floaty, a bit lazy, not necessarily the best words I want to use for it, but he's just not as fully engaged at times. And that might just be as he was adapting to playing more at the KHL level for that type of thing. And it's why his flashes of ability when he was on is why he was used at times on the penalty kill, even as I guess at the time, 20-year-old in the KHL, which is pretty good to get to that level. And he even was at times in the previous year when he was only 19. But the inconsistency is why he was also taken off it at times. So if he can kind of just harness all that, and again, he's not going to have to be the main guy. Even on the Marlies, he's probably not going to get the same level of playing time that he was in the KHL, where he was between, I want to say 16, 18 minutes. It would kind of bounce between that for the most part. He's probably only going to be someone who's more around kind of 12 to 15 minutes, especially in the NHL. So, if it's a matter of maintaining a kind of mental energy and mental focus to use that as much as possible when he's playing, just leave it out on the ice, use everything that you have, because if he does, he could be a legitimate, I would say, not a legitimate weapon, but like an above average defensive winger for that level. And having that and having that utility, again, you're just increasing the reasons why the coach would want to throw you out on the ice. And that's what's going to help get him to the NHL.
Yeah, and so as we begin to wrap up here and look ahead to this upcoming season, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that he might face coming over to North America, but you look at the profile, and it's a 6'2" winger who's got some decent size now. He's physically matured over the past couple of years. He's got some sneaky physicality to his game as well. I'm not worried about him being able to handle a bit more of a physical game, just given, as you mentioned, he's fought in the KHL. He's not afraid to throw the body around. He works along the boards. Like, that's very much an element of his game. I'm not worried about that translating at all. That's going to be a key area of his game as well. What is kind of the expectations for him coming into this season? Because there's a lot of Leafs fans that are starting to get excited about this player.
So I've seen, it's always something I'm not the best at kind of anticipating how a guy is going to look at fan stuff for that. But I've seen a lot of people say already they think he is like a sleeper candidate to get some NHL games this year. And I do agree with that. I do think the odds are good for him to get that chance. I'd say there's two things that are sort of outside of his control that will affect that. And one is how well and how quickly he's going to recover from injury. Like, even if he's healthy enough to get back, resume on ice activities, play in the preseason and some games in the AHL, is he going to be right back to 100% how he was before? Lower back, that's not, I can tell you as a guy who's had back problems all my life, it can, even if you're better, quote unquote, doesn't mean you're necessarily 100% and be able to do everything you were before. So how quickly can he get back to 100% where he's going, full throttle, like he was before? And the other one is the needs of the Leafs and what their depth chart is. So, a quick example is if Robertson winds up getting traded, there's one guy who's a potential bottom six winger that's one fewer guy for him to compete with. But he's still going to have to compete with the likes of Cowan at the start anyways. If they decide not to keep Cowan at the NHL the whole year, he's not in consideration after that, but beyond like the potential 10 game period. Minton's more of a center, so maybe not him type thing. But if they use Minton and he displaces someone who could be in consideration for the third line center and bump him over to the wing, that's a guy that he kind of indirectly has to compete with. But then there's other guys who have more initial experience, like Holmberg or Dewar. There's guys that he's going to have to beat in order to kind of get that regular playing time, unless they get injured. And injuries happen. They always do. Or guys get traded, guys get sick. How many times did the dressing room get hit with the flu last year with stuff like that? So I think that's why odds are good he'll get a shot. It might not be for like a sustained period, but there's also just, I can remember I think it was one of the seasons that Liljegren or Sandin or both were kind of doing well in the HL, were sort of ready to maybe get called up. And that was the one season where weirdly all the Leafs defense were healthy like all year. And so if that stuff happens,
it feels like every other year they use like 14.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it just could be like a freak year, whatever reason. All their bottom six forward, like all their forwards and wingers stay like mostly healthy. So like he doesn't have as much of an opportunity in that sense. But it still will be a valuable learning experience for him to get to the AHL and kind of be able to make it easier so that when he does have the chance, he's the guy they're going to go to for that. So I'm excited, like whether he's in the HL or the NHL, hopefully both after the year. I'm excited to see what he does because he's one of the few guys who was any prospect really, regardless where he's drafted or even as an overager, that I just came to like. So the first preseason game I watched of him after he was drafted, I wrote something on Pension Plan Puppets about like, he's a guy to look out for. And I was really holding myself back from saying at the time, like, oh, I can see him being an AHLer. And I kind of make that prediction because, I've been fooled before for some other things. So I didn't want to say it so early, but like I've not seen anything since then that's discouraged me from thinking that he could be an AHL player. Everything he's done, every improvement he's made has convinced me more and more that, he might not ever be, a top six guy, but as someone who can provide useful depth in the bottom six is something I can absolutely see as soon as this year.
Yeah, and so he's on absolutely that NHL trajectory. We could see an NHL debut as soon as this season, depending on, as you said, who remains in the mix at the NHL level and what injuries happen. What is the timeline to expect for him to become an NHL regular, though? We look at a season coming over to North America, transition period. It's not expected for him to be an NHL regular right out of the gate. Yeah. That would be very, very surprising to say the least, just given all the factors that go into his upcoming season between the injury, transitioning, a bunch of stuff. It's very much okay to be patient with a player like that. Yeah. But when do you expect to see him legitimately pushing for regular NHL minutes?
I mean, the optimistic take is as soon as sometime this year, maybe by like the end of the season. If we're going to use the Zach Hyman example again, like that's how long it took him. He played 50-something games in the HL, and then towards the end of the year is when the Leafs kind of, they called a whole bunch of their prospects up at the time. It was him, Nylander,
like everybody got
Brown.
Called up.
Yeah, but it was a very different roster with very different needs at that time. So he won't necessarily get that same opportunity, or he has to be better than they were at the time to like get the same opportunity. It would be very
circumstantial for him to get that opportunity.
But so like I could see him, especially come playoff. He seems like a guy who, if healthy, could absolutely be a playoff warrior.
Oh yeah.
He's not necessarily someone like he's physical in the sense that he'll invite contact or he'll fight through it. It doesn't discourage him. He'll give back what he takes. He's not necessarily someone who's going to chase down a hit though, or kind of like seek out a fight himself. But he will absolutely not back down from any of it, and he will play his game through whatever you physically throw at him type thing. So optimistic take as early this year. More realistically, I would say next year for some of that. But it's going to be fun watching him.
That's for sure. And I think a lot of people are going to become quick fans of him, whether we see him hopefully in the preseason. I'm hoping that he'll be ready to go for that because like we've seen with a couple of prospects in recent years, as soon as they kind of get that opportunity to show out on even in just the preseason stage, they can make some quick fans. And I definitely think that Grebenkin, for as many fans as he has already, will definitely do that once he gets a stage in North America. Brian, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping on. Let the people know where they can find your work.
Sure. So I post a lot of little updates on these prospects with some highlights, GIFs, videos on Twitter. My handle is at brigstew86. That's G in the middle, BRIGSTEW 86. You can also find my work on pensionplanpuppets.com, the Leafs blog. I post occasional kind of prospect updates through the season, like to kind of build up a bunch of games for each of them and then kind of write how their progression's going, what circumstances are changing, and things like that. So you have a large backlog of things if people want to get caught up on how I've thought about Grebenkin over the years. But yeah, that's where you can find kind of my bigger articles that come out.
Absolutely. And if you're not reading Pension Pan Puppets, you're doing it wrong. If you're not following Brian on Twitter and you care about prospects, you're doing it wrong as well. Brian, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Brian for jumping on. And I'm serious, if you're not following him and you care about these prospects, you're doing it wrong. You got to go follow him. The updates, the clips, everything that he does, second to none. That's going to do it for today's edition of Camp Countdown. Thanks again for tuning in. Be sure to check out all the past episodes. We've had some great guests on so far, chatting everything Leafs leading up to training camp and ultimately the start of the season in October. We'll see you tomorrow for more Camp Countdown. Have a good one.